Good morning, Vicky and Natalie. I'd like to welcome both of you to this nice informal roundtable conversation, although we're not around a table with COVID, kept us all electronically at home. But thanks for making time this morning. We're going to be having a very informal and hopefully an in-depth sort of discussion about the Golden Visa program. But before we jump into some of the exciting stuff, maybe I should also just introduce myself quickly as the commercial director of Sable International, and one of my responsibilities is looking after our investment migration business. And I think without a doubt, the Portugal Golden Visa is the most popular. So it should be a fun discussion, and I believe that there are lots of interesting things that we need to be talking about. So I think before we get into the detail of the interesting facts and figures and changes, Vicky, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you ended up in Portugal, having started your career as a law graduate from the once very famous Wits University in Johannesburg. And because we've been working together now, I think, since 2012. And it's been a good few years, but tell us about yourself.
Okay. Hi, Andy. Hi, Natalie. Thanks very much for having me. I was born and brought up in South Africa, and I did my schooling in Johannesburg, and I did my first year at Wits, my BA, and the idea was to do the LLB. But my parents are Portuguese, and they decided to move back to Portugal in my second year. And so I came to Lisbon, and I got into law at Lisbon University, and I concluded my law degree. And I qualified as a Portuguese lawyer. I did my 2 years of articles. I then moved to London for a year and a half, and I qualified as a UK solicitor. And I worked at a UK law firm to get some experience in the London market. And then I came back to Portugal, and I worked at an Anglo-Portuguese law firm and did a lot of private client work. So my area is mostly private client. Anything to do with investment in Portugal from the private client point of view. I've been at TPA since 2015, and as you've said, we've worked together since 2012 and helped a lot of South Africans investing in Portugal, and I'm always proud to promote South Africa in Portugal. So it's an honor to be here today to speak to both of you.
Thanks, Vicky, and I think very well qualified to speak English to South Africans and help them in Portugal. That brings me on to you, Natalie. Wow, I mean, it's almost been 5 years since you joined Sable International. I remember in Hong Kong getting that phone call where you were telling me that you were interested in moving to Portugal, and 6-7 months later, you joined us and you went. How's it been? Tell us a little bit about yourself. And a little bit about your sort of career background, and I suppose tell us what it's like living in Portugal as a South African.
Thanks, Andy. So yes, I was born and raised in Cape Town. Also have a Portuguese family. Grew up very much in a Portuguese traditional way, but in Cape Town. And I moved to the UK when I was 18, lived there for 4 years. Moved back to South Africa and then decided to come back to Europe again. So I've kind of been in and out of South Africa and Europe over the last 20 years. Don't want to give away my age. And my background, I've worked in property has been my background over the last, I would say, 12 years, working in Spain, Portugal, and in South Africa. And I've been living, as Andy said, I moved in 2016. I've, settled in quite easily. And I think the things that I really enjoy about Portugal is just the sense of security versus, being in South Africa. I think that was a big factor for me to make the move over, especially with a young family. And, given there's so many expats here, there's so many South Africans here, I felt like I slotted in quite easily. And I think it's also made it a lot easier. Although I do speak Portuguese, when you grow up in South Africa around English, you do kind of struggle with your grammar and everything. So it's nice that I can still work in English here because English is spoken throughout. So many providers, English is a second language here. So it's been really easy to slot in and just easy to find a place and just get used to the lifestyle here. So I must say I am quite happy, and I think that what I really enjoy is that contact with South Africans. So quite on a daily basis, I'm speaking to South Africans and assisting them with the golden visa process here on the ground and advising them. So there's a real rapport, and it really is, a nice part of my job to have that. So that's really me, actually, in a nutshell.
Thanks very much, and thanks for that introduction. So let's climb into the business of the day, and I think just to put a bit of context around it, Portugal is a residency program. People are not buying a passport, they're investing in the right to reside there, and I think it takes 5 or 6 years before you have the right to apply to become a citizen. But just having a look on the screen here, there are various different residency programs in Europe. But looking at statistics, Portugal is by far the most popular. Natalie, what would you sort of attribute that to in a nutshell?
I think that, again, just English being spoken here, widely spoken, I think it's also got to do with the location in Europe where we are, geographically placed. There's not a big time zone difference. And I think, a lot of people have traveled to Portugal or heard about Portugal. And I think as well, if you had to consider, the golden visa is a plan B, but if long term, doing a program like this, if for some reason you do decide to move over, I think considering the other options that you do have, it is quite easy to slot into a lifestyle in Portugal. I think also the investment points, is quite appealing as well. That you don't have to pay government fees towards this type of investment. So I think those are some of the key points and benefits of it.
Yeah, and I would imagine for South Africans and probably a lot of the sort of the typical country investors that you see, China, Turkey, a lot of them emerging markets, a lot of political risk. So probably a great currency hedge as well for the investments. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Vicky, the reasons do sound compelling. And I know anecdotally, speaking to a lot of my friends who've invested in Portugal, they've done well, they're happy. But there's a legal side to this. It's more than just an investment, and the devil's in the detail. And I think that we've seen that is that, it's not a simple process. So maybe what you could do is just give us a quick rundown from your perspective and from a legal perspective as to the bones of the program and how it all works and just some of the salient points.
Okay. Well, as Natalie mentioned, it is a residency program. So you invest in order to be able to become resident in Portugal. I think the main attraction in the program is the fact that you don't need to spend a lot of time in Portugal. And as a result, there are also no tax consequences of becoming resident in Portugal. So the program initially had, I think it was a minimum duration of 30 days per annum when it was initially set up. And as soon as they reduced that 7 days, that's when it became popular. Yeah. Because we had initially a lot of Chinese investors who weren't willing to spend more than a week in Portugal in order to qualify for this residency program. So that was the big benefit in the program, and still is today. So someone looking to get residency in Portugal, to be able to work and live in Portugal if that's their goal, and to be able to travel visa-free through the Schengen states, it's an attraction to them, especially business people who don't necessarily want to pack up and leave and come to Portugal. So the actual process of investing and qualifying, as you say, the devil's in the detail. There are some steps that you do need to go through in order to ensure that everything goes smoothly for your application. So the investment's important, but it's an investment with an objective to gaining the golden visa. And so you need to be very careful and take advice in terms of how you started, what the first steps are, if the investment qualifies, and we'll talk about the different types of investments later on. But you need to make sure, for example, that you have your Portuguese tax number in place. That would always be the first step in the process. You need to have a bank account in Portugal, and only then can you start considering making your investment. And I think a lot of people haven't realized also that you need to have your investment concluded before you can proceed with the application. So in terms of timeline, there are certain steps that need to be followed in order for everything to work out correctly. And then it's the application itself. I mean, as Sable know, as they assist their clients with all the documentation is very, very complicated because certain documents have certain periods of validity. You need to make sure that you get your criminal registry certificate, but not soon, because then it will have lapsed by the time you lodge it. You need to take into consideration your family if you want to bring your family with as well, because they can latch on to the main investor. What they need in order to qualify, the children need to be dependent, they can't be married. So there's a whole spectrum of considerations that you need to take into account before proceeding. And I think you do need legal advice and the guiding hand of someone who's been through it and who can help with the documentation. I think principally that. And I do admire anyone who does try it on their own, because it is very complicated. It's not a difficult process, but you do need to have all your ducks in a row for it to run smoothly.
Yeah, so it's about timing, and you're dealing with, I would imagine you're dealing with authorities in your home country, as well as the challenge of trying to time it with the Portuguese authorities' requirements.
Correct.
And that's where the frustration and sort of, you know, that challenge creeps in for investors. And I would imagine that, you know, with COVID, that's probably been further exacerbated. And I think that's something that we can chat a little bit about later. Is there anything else that's really relevant in terms of the program that a client needs to know? You mentioned that that's an interesting thing, that people have to actually invest before they can actually put in the application. Is there any risk of a client making an investment and then them changing and cancelling the program? What would happen in the event that somebody did invest in good faith and then they decided that they didn't want to continue with the program?
Well, if you don't want to continue with the program, you can always sell off your investment. So when you do apply for the golden visa and assuming that it's granted, you locked in for the first 2 years. So you have a valid residency card, and this was one of the changes of COVID, for 2 years, and then you renew it. So if you decide you don't want to continue on the program, you just don't renew your residency card.
So Vicky, if I could ask a question, because we do get a lot of this, is what happens if whilst you're on the program, the law changes? Is the law retroactive? What will happen going forward? I know there are some changes that are coming into play in July. You know, how does that leave clients that are already on the golden visa? And I think maybe, like as Andy mentioned, if between making the investment, what I understand is between making the investment and submitting your application, it's key that there's no change made in that gap, because then you might not be able to apply. So I think a lot of clients, they don't understand that it's twofold, you know, that it's not just about, you don't make the investment and automatically get residency. There's, you know, sometimes there's a bit of time that passes as we need to get documentation from their home country, etc., and then submit that. So I guess the question is, you know, is the law retroactive? What happens when the law changes?
No. So in principle, the law will never be retroactive when it applies, as long as you have your application in. And as you mentioned, there'll be a change to the legislation. It hasn't been published yet, but from what we know, from July onwards, certain cities, Lisbon and Port, have been confirmed. We're not sure about the coastal areas yet. They will probably stop qualifying for golden visa applications. So what clients need to be aware of is, if they've already invested in these two cities and haven't submitted their application, they should do so as quickly as possible. And any new investors looking to invest in those cities in property should do so as quickly as possible as well. And it's, as you say, Natalie, it's not making the investment that means that you have the golden visa. You then have to follow that up with the application to the immigration authorities. And the issue is that you need to have at least submitted the program to safeguard your position. So timing is of essence, especially this year, because as you say, there will be a change in the legislation. It hasn't been published yet, but it will be probably from July 2021.
Yeah, so that's really critical. I mean, that's very important. When a client makes a decision, I think the advice needs to be, if you're going into one of these areas that could possibly change, is to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row. And I would imagine there'll be a lead time. But obviously, once the law is published, then, we'll be able to advise clients.
Correct.
Great. Well, look, that's all exciting and helpful. I just want to chat about some of the statistics. This is the Golden Visa since it was launched back in 2012. There have been in excess of 9,000 main investors with family dependents, spouses and dependents who've tagged along, a further 16,000 people. So in the grand scheme of things, we're not talking about masses of people. And from what I understand, most of these people don't even live in Portugal. But I mean, there's been it's a staggering amount of money that has been invested in the country. So I would imagine the Portuguese on the whole are happy with over 5 or 6 billion direct investment. Plus, I would imagine there's a lot of other benefits that come when people have to travel, do their biometrics, etc. But Vicky, maybe just give us some of the insights into the clients that you deal with. I mean, you don't only deal with our clients, you're dealing with clients from all over the world. What are the trends that you're seeing? I mean, it looks like about 50% of the investors are still from China. I mean, that's a substantial amount. Is that slowing down, or what's happening?
I think China has slowed down. They were the first country to latch onto the program, and they were the big investors initially. But I think that's also because China has a history in terms of residency programs. They're very aware of getting second nationalities. We have clients mostly we saw a rise in US clients during the previous administration in the US. So a lot of people were looking to get out of the US.
No comment.
That might drop off.
It might drop off, but we had quite a big increase in terms of US clients. We have a lot of Indian clients from Lebanon, from Saudi Arabia. So I think the common denominator here is either the country where they live has some turmoil and they want a plan B, or sometimes it's just have a foot in Europe, be able to travel visa free or have their children study in Europe. So it depends. I think it's a very personal situation. It depends on the client. But I think for the most part, the countries of origin have issues and they want a plan B if something should happen. At least that's what we've seen in terms of our clients coming to Portugal. And Portugal was relatively unknown. To be honest, I remember going to the UK to conferences on succession, private client law, and they never spoke about Portugal. But that hasn't been the case recently. So when I go, everyone's been here, everyone's heard about it. So I think Portugal has been rediscovered in the past few years. Also thanks to this program, thanks to the NHR, and it became a tourist destination that it wasn't before, and it evolved a lot as a result.
Could I ask maybe sorry, Andy, if just based on what you're saying, in terms of Brexit now, are you seeing UK applicants, can they apply for the golden visa now, because they used to be part of Europe, but now they're seen as a third country? Have you had many inquiries from people in the UK? I know that Portugal is very popular in terms of retirement, and like you say, the non-habitual tax regime for those living here, the tax benefit. Have the inquiries increased?
Towards the end of last year, we had a flurry of inquiries. A lot of people who wanted to get in before 31st of December. And there still has been, because a lot of them didn't necessarily want to live in Portugal. They just wanted to register in order to be able to benefit from traveling in the EU. But what we advised clients was that if your intention is not to live in Portugal, they couldn't apply for the EU registration certificate. So what's happened is we have been inquiring with CEF because effectively it's a third country. And the Golden Visa is not open to EU countries or EEC countries. But CEF has confirmed that, yes, if it's a third country and there's no special regime in place, they can apply for the Golden Visa. If the idea isn't to live in Portugal, but just to spend the 7 days.
So we have a client in Cape Town who's one of the spouses got a British passport. In the past, it would just be the South African one that applied. So now it could be both spouses and the dependent children.
Correct. It's still a bit muddy because it's so recent, but CEF has indicated that CEF is the immigration authority. I'm sorry, I didn't clarify. So they have indicated that it is a third country at the moment and that, yes, they can qualify as any other country. What we're still trying to determine is, because we have a lot of clients who already have properties in Portugal, they've asked, well, I already bought a property, will that qualify? That they haven't been able to clarify. So I don't know if it will only count for investments made after they actually became a third country or not.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Well, I think the message there should be, if you are a British national and you're interested in Portugal, just reach out, because, I think we're seeing it across our business units in the UK. There's an enormous amount of uncertainty around Brexit in terms of many things. And I think there are lots of people taking advantage of it and advising clients to go for the Golden Visa, because it's an expensive visa. And no doubt through the investments, these guys are going to earn a lot of money. But my advice, I guess, is before you jump, get a couple of opinions if you're British. Yeah. All right. Well, look, interesting. And I think the benefits certainly sound like it's a safe country. I know from a lifestyle point of view, it's certainly been very well adopted by South Africans. The official stats, 394, we're lying in 4th place. So, Natalie, I think that's going to bring us to some questions for you. I mean, these are Sable-specific statistics on the screen at the moment. And looking at the capital investment compared to the program in its entirety, Sable clients are slightly lower, 3 versus 4%. Real estate really still very popular, but I mean, it's over 90% of the investments in terms of the entire program have been in real estate. But an interesting little category on the right there, private equity fund, 18%. I mean, that's a meaningful number. So why are South Africans choosing this kind of particular mix of investments, and also what is it particularly that South Africans are looking for when investing in this Golden Visa program?
Yeah, I think some of the key points are obviously wanting a return on their investment and hoping for some capital appreciation over the years. And I think our strategy is always to make sure that when a client wants to exit, that they are at least going to make their money back and some sort of increase. But what happened in the past is that I think in the beginning with the capital investment, we've had a few clients that did the 1 million. But I think people got more used to the property side of thing and property investments. And, when the program did start, you were making a great investment. The clients that invested back in 2014-15 have seen a great increase on their initial investment in terms of property. So I think they got a lot more comfortable with it. There was a lot more interesting product around, in the center of Lisbon being redeveloped and some beautiful places. And then I think that, also just that we deal with a lot of South African clients that South Africans are quite used to financial products. So when they introduced the private equity fund, I think that became also quite interesting for those investors that are savvy with making financial investments. So the private equity
that's also I mean it's a much lower amount in terms of capital.
Yeah, exactly. It's 350, and I think that you get two types of clients. Some clients prefer bricks and mortar, and others don't. And I think that's where private equity it slots in, where it's a 350. It's clean, it's hands off. You're not concerned with property managers, which again, people who have done the property investment. We don't just leave you dangling. We introduce you to the right property manager. We let you know how you should proceed and accountants, everything that you need in place. But I think with the private equity fund, for sophisticated investors, it's quite appealing. because there is no extra transactional costs, stamp duties, notary fees, as you would have on a property, and also that annual tax, which is not that high, it's minimal for municipality tax and all the rest. So that's why I think it took off. I think that the category was introduced in 2017 or 18, but I think we properly started marketing our first fund in 2018. And I think once it gained momentum, it really picked up. And I think, especially now in the last year where we've been faced with COVID, originally we had a lot of clients. We always encourage clients to travel to Portugal and make their investments. So I had accompany clients and all the rest. But now, given COVID situation, people cannot travel. So they have been more comfortable with the private equity fund because it's a financial product. They don't physically feel that they need to be and see a property. But on the other hand, we've also had a lot of clients who've been interested in the 280,000 euro category, which I can discuss probably a bit
we'll chat
later
about that just now. But whilst we're on that private equity comes with its own risks. Vicky, maybe you could just answer this question, and this is something that I think comes up a lot. Are there any other ways that somebody can invest capital? For instance, can one invest in unit trusts or some type of mutual fund offered by, a well-known financial institution? Because obviously clients are going to be looking at the risks, and private equity, by the sheer nature of the name, there's inherent risk.
Yeah, it is possible, Andy, but not under this type of investment. So you're not looking at 350,000, but you're looking at the €1 million investment. So the actual amount is higher.
Okay, so if people want to take that kind of slightly more risk-averse approach, it's going to be a big amount of capital. Great. Well, look, I think Natalie, you started touching on the various options. So maybe what we should do is just give you the floor for a few minutes and just run through. Let's talk about the real estate. And I think from what I understand, the program originally, it was 500,000 minimum investment into real estate, but there have been changes in the program where they've lowered the amounts. So maybe talk us through some of that, and then and some of the detail there and some of the trends maybe that you're seeing.
Sure.
With your clients.
So I think that there were certain areas, especially when the program started, that were a lot more appealing to investors. So areas like Central Lisbon and the Cascais area. And I think back then you could actually buy something in Cascais and Lisbon that was, really decent, would be brand new. There would be space and would be a good investment. And I think just over time, naturally, as the property market does, prices increase. So, what you could buy in Lisbon wasn't that great anymore at 500,000. Then you started kind of looking at prices increasing. But people who want to do a residency program want to normally spend closest to the threshold and not overspend. And then a few years ago, Porto started becoming quite attractive. And at that, you would be able to buy 2 properties for the price of 500,000, which you couldn't do in Lisbon anymore. So I think the 500 euro category is more, you can buy properties that are already built and they are done, or you buy secondhand properties. The other categories, there's the 350,000 and the 280,000. Those 2 categories are more for renovation. So you have to buy a property that's within an urban rehabilitation area and it needs to be renovated. And then you can fulfill the 350,000 euro category. So you could find these types of developments, and you can still find them in Lisbon and Porto. They're obviously in the regeneration area. And we didn't see too many people interested in that category because it's quite complex in terms of you need to have a registered builder. The property itself has a certain criteria. So we must always remember that there's the investment and the immigration office that sets out the requirements for each of these categories. So we've sold a few in the 350 more recently, and the 280,000 euro is the same, similar to the 350 category where we need to renovate, but it has to be in a low density area. So you're looking more at the internal areas of Portugal.
So that's essentially, there's a discount on the amount of capital required to try and steer investment away from the popular cities.
Exactly.
And I think that's interesting, because at the end of the day, I think what's key for investors and clients to understand is that these governments put these programs into place to attract investment, and actually there's an objective. So, Vicky, I mean, from what I can see is that the vote that happened last January to disqualify Lisbon and Porto as qualifying investments, I think talks a little bit to the strategy of the Portuguese government has kind of achieved what it wanted to do. I mean, I know personally, I've been to Lisbon. My first trip to Lisbon was in 2012. And I was there, 6-7 weeks ago, you just can't compare it. I mean, it's been an incredible transformation from a really dilapidated city to something quite beautiful, vibey. So tell us a little bit about some of the changes that are happening and what you think will happen going forward.
I think that's it exactly, Andy. I mean, if you looked at Lisbon and Port, especially Port, a few years ago, and you look at it now, it has nothing to do with what it was in the past. Yeah. So it developed the cities. The downside is that it also pushed property prices up, and local Portuguese residents cannot afford to live in central Lisbon or central Port. And I think that was the main motive to change the program and to try take the investment out of these big cities and push it towards the interior, because the interior of Portugal is very underdeveloped. So I think what they're looking to do is perhaps have the same situation that occurred in Lisbon and Port in more interior regions that need this type of development, this type of investment. Because if people are interested in getting the residency, then it might be that they are willing to look at other areas and invest in those areas. So I think the main change of the legislation is specifically that, to stop investment in Port and Lisbon, to stop the prices from going up, and to try develop the interior of Portugal.
Yeah, I think that's important, because I think part of the charm of both Lisbon and Porto is having local people living there. And you don't want these sort of dormitory ghost cities where investors have got empty apartments, and it really changes the character. So I think that in that respect, I think I support it and think it's actually a great idea. But Natalie, from your side, what are you doing to mitigate the situation where people have now built trust with Portugal? They like Lisbon. I mean, it's absolutely primary residential market. Porto as well, really underpinned by, they're both economic hubs. Tourism is strong, although at the moment with COVID not, but that's temporary. Let's take a long-term view. What does the interior of Portugal look like? Have you got experience there? Are there pockets where one would be interested in investing? Because I think you even mentioned it earlier on, you're investing here for residency, but anecdotally, historically, this has been a fantastic program. Clients have had great returns. Do you think that that's going to happen in the interior?
Yeah, I believe so. Look, I think there's a lot of programs incentivizing people to move to the interior, Vicky. I think if you can confirm that, but the government
point of view.
So they're incentivizing locals to move into the interior. So I think that, if through investment, there's regeneration, there's renewal, and with tourism, naturally people might start moving towards the interior. I know that the area that we've had a lot of clients buy in, it's a historical area. It draws a lot of tourism, especially local and Spanish tourism. But also there's other, there's businesses that are moving over to that area. They're setting up shop there, drawing a lot of engineers to go live in that town. But there's also hospitals and universities. So the typical sort of properties that clients are investing in these areas are either student accommodation or for Airbnb type, tourism. So, we've had quite a lot of success now, especially in the last year with the 280,000 category, again, due to people not being able to travel.
Yeah.
And
I would imagine with a weakening rand, which is actually relatively strong at the moment, but it's had a tumble and it will tumble again. 280 is quite a compelling entry level compared to 500,000.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that also, just maybe talking on the more emotional side, which I always say to my clients, it's not an emotional investment. Don't get emotional about it. We must look at the figures, look at the facts. But there's always that element that does creep in. And I've just got some images here that the one that's showing now is your typical 350 rehabilitation. And this is actually a project in Porto. And you can see on the left there's the original building, and then this is the images for the renovation. With with property in Portugal, it always maintains its charm somehow, because there are certain criteria. You're not allowed to break down the facade, so it's not like it's becoming this modern city. And even with the 280,000, that's just an image of the 350 private equity fund. The asset actually is a hotel, so that's just an image there. And further images, again, it's very similar. It's warehouses that are being redone, and just to give you an idea. But on the 280,000, you're looking at projects like this. And this is in the town, the low density area. That's what the requirement is. It has to be a renovation project in a confirmed low density area. So you can see it's how people used to live many, many, many years ago, with, very original, very thick walls, and then it gets renovated. So as you can see, it's still keeping that charm. And I think a lot of investors, I know it's purely financial, but the fact that it can be something where they feel it's, I've bought a place in Portugal, and, everyone loves the tiles, or, the marble, sinks or whatever. So just to give you an idea of what you're investing in. And I think it's important to know that Sable, we're not a real estate company. We do different investments. We are cross-border investments. We do wealth advice, immigration, forex. So we are not tied to one developer or one agent. We're always looking at the market. We only partner with specific partners that we will endorse, because at the end of the day, we've got a 6 to 7 year relationship with each family. And I'm proudly can say that to this day, we've not had any clients say, "Oh, I've made such a bad investment. What do I do?" So I think we can take great pride in actually saying that, given just the network that we've got here in Portugal, and our support in our Cape Town office.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for that. So are there any more exciting images you can share before we move on? I want to chat a little bit about...
I'd love to show you more, but this is all I've got for today.
Okay, brilliant. All right, Vicky, you mentioned the NHR, which nobody will recognize that little terminology, but just tell us a little bit about the NHR and some sort of facts and what is attracting people to Portugal under this tax status.
Okay, so the NHR is the non-habitual resident tax regime. It's not an immigration regime, so a lot of people mistakenly think that they'll come to Portugal on the NHR. No. What you need to do is have, from a legal point of view, some form of residency in place, and then become tax resident in Portugal. The name is also misleading because it's not non-habitually resident. You do have to be tax resident in Portugal. So either have a primary residence here or spend more than the 156 days per year. So 183, sorry. So what happens is, for the NHR, you get, it depends on the type of income you receive, but there are certain types of income that you can receive tax-free. Pensions, for example, used to be tax-free. Now they're subject to fixed tax rates of 10%. So initially we saw a lot of Nordic countries, from Sweden, from Norway, moving to Portugal, because for a period of 10 years, which is the validity of the the NHR regime, they'd get their pensions tax-free because it wasn't taxed in their state of origin and it wasn't taxed in their state of residence. So there are certain types of income where it is beneficial to have this status. And the only requirement to benefit from it is, as I say, to become tax resident in Portugal and not have been tax resident in the preceding 5 years. As long as you fulfill those two requirements, you can apply for it. So in terms of golden visa and NHR, it is possible to have both, but you do need to effectively move to Portugal. So to be tax resident in Portugal, which would imply spending more than the 7 days on average per year in Portugal. But it has been a very successful tax regime. There's certain areas that are considered high value activities. So we've had a lot of actors coming to Portugal, a lot of at least changing their tax residence to Portugal to benefit from this regime, because then they benefit from a 20% tax rate on their income in that specific area. So engineers, doctors, anything linked to IT as well, consultants. It's been a very successful program. So this, in tandem with the Golden Visa, has helped Portugal develop extremely well over the last few years.
Yeah, and from what I understand, this was launched, I think, after the global financial crisis of 2008. So the regime has really been around since, I think, 2009.
Exactly. That's when it was introduced, although initially there were some hiccups with the legislation. So it only started really getting recognized in about 2011.
Okay. Yeah, again, something that the Portuguese government did to obviously try and attract inward investment. So I think, that's one of the things I think that's always impressed me about Portugal is that, as a lot of people are concerned about a lot of the European governments being quite socialist, etc. But at the end of the day, all governments are competing for taxpayers, competing for capital investment. And I think Portugal have been very pragmatic in their approach. And as you said earlier, it's kind of opened the window and people have seen the country, and I've noticed a massive difference. You hear lots and lots of foreign accents. If you hang around Cascais, I see a lot of French people, I would imagine, moving there for tax reasons.
Correct.
I'm sure their governments don't like it, but at the end of the day, Portugal has certainly made an impact, I think. But that is something that we're starting to see a lot more through our wealth business, a lot more South Africans looking, to physically leave the country. So this is not a plan B. We're talking now, if you want to go and move there, if you've got an EU passport, then suddenly this non-habitual becomes very attractive, because coming from a weak currency zone into the Eurozone, it could be compelling. So I think that that's something of interest. Do you think the government will look at changing that anytime soon, or is that still something that's working well for the Portuguese?
I think it's working well. There have been some complaints that these new residents don't pay their taxes, but I think that the government appeased it somewhat by introducing the minimum rate for the pensions, the 10%. So I don't believe, although we can never guarantee anything, that there'll be any further changes anytime soon.
Well, I'm sure with COVID, all governments are looking for as much money as they can.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Look, I don't think we've got too much more to discuss, but there's something really important that I do think people are going to be concerned about now, is that everybody thought on the 31st of December, boom, we're going to say goodbye to 2020 and 2021. The COVID virus is going to fly away. It hasn't. I know that Portugal is currently in a very hard lockdown. Britain is. And I think we're sitting here in South Africa thinking that our government's mad and quite illogical. But I think one of the benefits of doing business cross-border is that the whole world's gone mad. Natalie, what are you doing within your team to try and mitigate the COVID effect? Let's call it that. People can't just jump on a plane. You've got to go and have tests. You're not necessarily going to be able to even fly into Portugal. What are you doing to try and help clients to still take advantage of this opportunity to invest in Portugal and actually get into the program with COVID?
Yeah, so I can probably talk about new clients and existing clients, because as we say, we've got a long relationship with clients. We see you through the whole process. But with new clients, we've been able to adapt and get everything done remotely. So there's obviously a lot of paperwork that needs to be done for fiscal numbers, for banks, and for making the actual investment. You do need an attorney that is going to be acting on your behalf here in Portugal. So all those documents need to be signed, but we have been able to facilitate all of that remotely and in a step-by-step process. So depending also, you will be advised, I'll guide you on the investments and what we're looking at. And we set up meetings with developers or with operators of the fund. And we've had a handful of clients who've actually still gone the actual property 500,000 euro investment route. And that how that works is that I take a brief from the client, advise them, send them a selection, go through the selection, and then I go and do viewings on their behalf. So Google Earth pin drops of, you can go and walk the streets on Google Earth of the location of that building. I take a full video, running comments, and all of that, and then guide the client through that process. Then the only next step is that they can be submitted online. So our team in Cape Town helps with all the documentation from South Africa, which we coordinate very closely with the attorneys, with Vicky, and courier all of that through and then submit them online. The only time they need to then travel is to actually do their biometrics. But by that time, they would have already received a pre-approval. So they're already in the system, okay? So which is the safest place to be. But I think that also just talking about existing clients, because every new client is going to become an existing client. So I think that during this time, I think it's also been quite key that a lot of our clients have said, what do we do? My cards are expiring. I need to do my 14-day stay, etc. So we advise clients, and we've, sorry, Vicky, I love law firms, but there's some law firms or clients that go directly with law firms. It's not top of mind for the attorney to advise their client, look, you should actually travel before it's expired. So we're quite proactive with that. And we encourage clients to travel when they could, so that, because SEF hasn't really been too lenient with in terms of meeting your requirements that we know of, Vicky, as far as I understand. You still do need to do your stay. And fortunately, we've seen about 5 or 6 families travel since the September period until December successfully, obviously meeting the requirements of COVID tests. But they managed to do their 14-day stay. And I think that what's really helpful is I also think that they felt some sort of sense of security knowing that there's someone from Sable here that they can WhatsApp and just check, where do I go get my COVID test? I'm traveling now. Have you heard about this? And so, we also, the support is extended here in Portugal, even when you are already an existing client. It's not just that initial hurdle, but we're here throughout and able to guide you when things like COVID happen or any changes do take place.
Thank you. And Vicky, look, you've got clients from all over the world. You've got a lot of clients who've come to you probably directly from South Africa. Maybe you could just share some of the risks and frustrations that they've experienced, and also from you, from a legal practice perspective, what are the challenges that you face when you're dealing with a direct client who's got to then go and do stuff in another country where you can't really help them?
Yeah, it is complicated. I think the documents in the country of origin are always the big challenge for us. We try to work as closely as possible with the consulates in those countries. I think the country where we've had the biggest difficulty has been Saudi Arabia, because it's very difficult to advise clients. We can't even understand the documentation, let alone know its validity or what additional stamps they require. So I think having a document processing service, clients probably don't appreciate what added value it is, because it's a whole thing that comes off your shoulders. Having someone there to remind you, look, your card expires in 6 months. Have you requested this? Have you done this? I've even had clients who have come directly, and I've actually advised, look, ask Sable if they know someone who can get at Home Affairs, who can get this document for you, or where you can get the apostille. And as you say, each country is a country. And I remember recently we had a client whose children were from the US, although he's not a US national, and we needed a certificate of non-impediment. And it's taken us almost a year to get that document because we didn't know where to get it. He didn't know where to get it. Yeah. So we did an affidavit, but there was a different type of declaration that we could have obtained. So each country is different, and it really is a value added service if you do have someone who can assist with the document side, because that's the most complicated in this process, is trying to get the timings right, the validity of the document.
And it happens 3 times. You know, it's not just an initial, but we have to renew the golden visa, and each time we renew the golden visa every 2 years, we need those documents again. So it's not just a once-off.
And also things change. I mean, I know I'm very well aware that during the course of the last 5 or 6 years, you know, validities of certain documents change. You know, even though I think a police certificate might be valid from the issuer for 6 months, but Portugal only recognizes for 3 months. And, you know, it's just these little complexities that trip people up and often end up with people having to have made an extra trip, et cetera, et cetera. That's interesting. Natalie, I'm going to wrap up quite soon, I think, because we've been going for 10 minutes short of an hour. It's been really informative, but maybe you can just address the question of how does Sable add value? And there are 2 things. We're talking about mitigating the risk of the investment, and maybe you can just spend 30 seconds on that. And then also in terms of the process around the immigration, because that is a big question.
So the first question, well, I'll start off with the partners that we do use. You know, we've have track record with our partners. We also have clients that reinvest with those same partners because they feel comfortable. But also from a Sable side, we do our due diligence on, for example, the private equity fund and on properties, obviously with my background and being knowledgeable. And then again, with the investment side, there's also a big part that the attorneys play to ensure that it's a legitimate investment. Sorry, Andy, I forgot the second question.
Yeah, and just in terms of the immigration process, and I think Vicky did touch on that in terms of the handhold. You know, this is not a quick investment. You know, boom, you've bought your property and you get a Portuguese passport. This is a long old journey. We're talking 5 or 6 years, substantial amount of money. There's complexity, there's risk around the investment. I think you've addressed that. You know, the experience from day one to when somebody actually goes and does their language test.
Yeah, so again, through the investment side, you know, once you receive your residency card, you know, we ensure that we're reminding you, well, you know, it is a residency program. And I think the key is a lot of people want to get to citizenship. Okay, that's the objective here. So we ensure that you get through that 5-year period with you doing your stays, and we always tell clients, you know, stay longer in Portugal and do as much as you can, build a storyline. But another key element is that also doing the Portuguese, there's a required Portuguese element for citizenship and for permanent residency. So we let you know that can be done. We advise clients as well, once you commit to the program, start with your Portuguese now. But our team in Cape Town is always on hand. We receive various emails from clients, existing clients, asking questions about their stay and when they should travel, etc. And just given that I'm also based in Portugal, I've got that access to have meetings, well, not face-to-face anymore, but access to our partners, to our attorneys. And also, I think being located here, I'm always watching the news. So I know what's going on in the country and what we're facing and keeping my finger on the pulse and what's happening, statistics coming out, et cetera, et cetera. So I think actually I saw that, I don't know, Vicky, if you saw that there was a 12% decrease in golden visa applications last year. But I think from our side, the way we see it is that we had a very successful year last year, despite COVID. We had, I think, around 20 new golden visa investors. And I think that 12% might be a little bit off because, as we say, there are two parts. there's investment, but there's the application as well. And there can be a delay in that application when it comes to the documents from our side. So we have this in mind, and we always, we ensure our goal is that you submit for your golden visa and you get approved. We've never had anyone rejected from the golden visa because we've had working with the right partners, but also working with the right law firm, which is key. So we've not had anyone not receive their residency card because
Thanks.
we've assisted them.
Well, that sounds good. So I'm going to ask each of you to have a closing comment, if you would like, if you've got anything further that you think people may be interested in. And maybe, Natalie, just start with you.
I probably would just like to touch on something that's quite important that, since I do receive all the inquiries, I think when people mention Portugal, everything always comes to me because I'm based here. But, and I think Vicky can agree here, is that it is quite easy. If you want to immigrate to Portugal and come and live here, it's quite easy to do that. There are various types of visas that you can do. So if you're wanting to physically, if you say, Natalie, my family and I want to move in the next 6 months, 1 year, then I'm going to direct you directly to Vicky and say, Vicky's going to be able to assist you with that. I think it's important to know that the golden visa is for those that want a plan B and have no intention of moving to Portugal in the next year or two. It can be long term, but in the next year or two. But you want to gain that residency under your belt so that you can eventually acquire citizenship. Yeah. And I think
so what you're saying is people need to consult and take advice before making this big
investment. Exactly.
Thank you.
So that's my ending
Vicky,
comment.
Any closing comments from you?
No, I think that's a valid point, Natalie. I think each case is a case. So you should see what your objective is, and then we can align or advise according to what you intend to do. And if you effectively do want to do the golden visa and you do want one of these investments in Lisbon or Port, we'd advise you to act as quickly as possible, because we'll keep updated on the legislation, but we do know that a change is coming in July for sure. So I think acting now, and we do have everything in place to be able to do things remotely, would be a wise decision.
Great. Well, thanks both very much for joining me this morning on this flat screen table. And I guess my closing comment is, this is a complex solution. It's a fantastic opportunity for people who come from countries where there's political risk or economic risk to create the plan B, mainly for the children. I think most of our investors are more concerned about, a legacy. But there's complexity. One needs to consider, if you're investing offshore, what are the tax implications? Do you need a will to cover your investment in Portugal? These are all things that people never really think about. And it always amazes me in my travels and discussions with clients is how many people make substantial offshore investments without planning correctly. And one really needs to understand, if you think about in your own home country, if you're investing in something, you're going to make sure that it's insured. You're going to make sure that it's properly managed. You're going to make sure that it forms part of your estate, and you're going to understand the tax implications of both capital gains, income taxes, lots of things. So please, reach out, talk to people like us at Sable. We've got great partners. You've met Vicky, Natalie on the ground there. I think it's a very unique opportunity, and we certainly have all bases covered. So thank you both again. And behind the scenes, Sarah, thank you for putting this little presentation together. And we'll chat again soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Vicky. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.